Now we are going to record in three, two. Welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. Many people out there who are listening is the typical entrepreneur looking to start and grow a business. And I think that you can always learn from somebody who is not only a professor, but has been in the circles or the rooms with the biggest companies. And our next guest has done just that. His name is Dick DeVoe. And let me just read off a couple things from his bio. Dick is well known in the industry, having consulted for such Fortune 500 companies as American Express, Hewlett Packard, Alcoa, DuPont, Pillsbury, General Electric, and Chemical Bank. Have you guys ever heard of those? He was named the Statistician of the Year for 2008 by the Boston chapter of the American Statistical Association for his contributions to teaching, research, and consulting. In his spare time, he is an avid cyclist and swimmer. Yeah, all right, we got to talk about bicycle riding for sure. He is also the founder and the founder and bass for the Doo-Wop group. I didn't even read that the first time. We got to talk about Doo-Wop, the diminished faculty. That's, I guess, what your group is known as. That's awesome. And as a frequent singer and soloist with the various local choirs, including the Choir Victoria of Paris, France. I don't know what I'm saying that. The choir, is that how you say that? Dick is the father of four children, and it just seems like you are a professor with a personality, which I really, really respect. So it is an honor to have you here and talk about your book, Business Statistics. Thanks so much for being here, Dick.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure.
Man, I
So
didn't know you were a doo-wop guy. I skipped over that part. I love doo-wop, man. Can we just start off with that real quick?
it was the best. So the group, unfortunately, we lost our baritone, which is the key person. I'm the bass, I'm the low guy, but the baritone is the guy who has to sing all the middle parts. And if he messes up, like the whole group falls apart. And we lost him to tenure years ago. So it's a little sad. We haven't gotten back, but
Oh,
it's a great group. And the president, Morty Shapiro, who's now the president at Northwestern, when he was at Williams, he loved to use us. He would bring us in for all sorts of events. And it was great because we had four faculty members and we'd sing for the trustees and things like that. And people loved us. But
I
now I
love.
just do more serious singing. As you said, I have a concert coming up next month with the Chœur Victoria in Paris, who I've sung with for off and on for 20 years. So it's all good.
Wow. And I said that completely wrong. It's
Okay.
yeah. So anyways, you still are singing, but doo-wop, let's just go back to that. Name a few bands or songs that you really love singing. Like I'm thinking the Marcells, and maybe you're talking about Rockin' Robin. I mean, give me some ones that you really like singing.
Well, Stand By Me is a classic,
Oh,
and oh, actually, one of my favorite groups of all time is the Four Freshmen.
whoa, I don't know that.
The Four Freshmen, and go look them up sometime. They did a song called Blue World that is it's the hardest thing to sing because these four guys sang four parts like right on top of each other. And so that took us ages to get down, but it was so much fun to sing. It's a blue world without you. It's a blue world. Yeah. So, and what else we do? Um, Shaboom by the Crew
Oh,
Cut.
yes.
That was a fun one.
The Little Diamonds,
Ding
Kenny
dong,
Vance, Looking for an Echo. Oh, man. Kathy Diamonds in the no, who is that? Who sings uh man, there's some really good, I haven't even thought about some doo-wop bands in a long time, but the Soft Winds, I'm sure you're familiar with them too.
I don't know the soft ones.
Oh man, these are what I used to take girls to doo-wop dances in college. I know I
Nice.
enjoyed myself. I don't know if they enjoyed it as much as me, but I grew up on oldies, so I'm glad we were able to catch that. I'm glad you put that in the bio because now I get a sense of who you are. It's great.
And
Anyways,
we had a great version. The last thing I'll say, we had a great version of the Star Spangled Banner, which was really a doo-wop version of it. It was pretty wild, and we used that for the beginning of some of the home basketball games. Which I remember the first time we did it, and somebody came and said, "I don't know. I was told these guys are good. Let's see what they got." And then we did it, and the guy says, "Oh my God, I hope the basketball team is as good as you guys were." So that was great.
please tell me you have something on YouTube. Do you? Anything out there?
I have a couple of COVID parodies that I wrote on YouTube. One was to um, the tune of "Hey There, Delilah," so it's "Hey There, Corona." I did that one, and the other one was to Maggie May, which was, "Wake up, COVID. Think I've got something to say to you." It's late September, and I really should be back at school, so I did that one, and then I in the middle of COVID, I sang the song "Shenandoah." Just got inspired one day, and that's out there. So I'm on SoundCloud. I'm on YouTube. You can
Oh,
find me.
I'm gonna check it out. That's great. And now you're gonna get me on a doo-wop kick. Every once in a while, I'll
Right.
go from like the Doors to doo-wop back to Nirvana. I'll put on doo-wop after this. So, anyways, this book, Business Stats, obviously is the textbook for schools. But how did you find your way into this world, becoming a professor, and obviously consulting some of the biggest companies? Give us the quick Cliff Notes rundown on the journey, if you will.
Okay, so first of all, Business Stats is just one of our titles. I started with the book called Intro Stats, and that was our first book. But let me go back even before that. So I first started teaching at the Wharton School in the 80s, and then I went to Princeton, and I was teaching engineers at Princeton. And one of the things I teach is experimental design. So how do you set up an experiment, clinical trials? What do you do? How do you analyze it? It's a great subject. And I was using a book by my mentor, Stu Hunter, who wrote it with George Box, another famous statistician. And I thought this was the Bible. In fact, in consulting, everybody out in industry calls Box, Hunter, and Hunter Statistics for Experimenters, the Bible of this. So I use this, of course. And then I remember reading the course reviews at the end of the semester, and the students said, the course was great. They said, but the book, I don't know. I didn't really relate to the book. And I thought, okay, I first read that. I thought, well, they just don't appreciate it. It's a great book. But it kept happening. It kept happening. And I just realized that, it spoke to my generation. And maybe it wasn't speaking, I was only in my early 30s at the time I'm talking about here, but it wasn't speaking to the 18 and 19-year-olds. So I started writing my own version of a book on experimental design. And I took it to one publisher, and my take was, and this is important, my take was, I'm going to write a book that really speaks to students. So my audience was imagining an 18-year-old who doesn't want to take this course with their baseball cap backwards, sitting there opening up this thing going, oh my God, I got to read this before next lecture. And that was my audience. So I tried to say, how can I talk to that person? So it was pretty darn informal. Let me just say that. And I first sent it to a very distinguished publishing company called Springer Verlag on the advice of one of my colleagues. And the editor from Springer Verlag sent it out to various people for review, and the first two came back and said, "Oh no, this is not appropriate for our series." And so he called me up and he said, "Dick, I'm really sorry. Uh, I got a couple of reviews and I just don't think it's going to work." And I said, "Okay." And then about a week later, he got two more reviews that said, "Wow, this is really something new. We should publish this."
What?
So he called me back and he said, let's retalk. And I said, you know what? If I'm going to publish with somebody, I want them to believe in my book from the day one.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to hear, you do this and that. So I dropped it. And then a young, aggressive, very talented acquisition editor from Pearson had heard about me, and she worked in Boston, but I was now at Williams. So that's the other side of the state. But she lived just north of me, and she'd heard about me in my book somehow. And she said, "Can I come to your lecture?" Out of the blue. And I said, "Sure." And so she came to my lecture, watched me teach an intro statistics course, and said, "I want to sign your book." And I said, "Great." So I was writing this book. And then about 6 months later, she calls me up and she says, "You know that book you're writing?" I said, "Yeah." She said, how's that going? I said, "Well, it's going along." She said, "I want you to stop that. I want you to write a book at the introductory statistics level. I want you to write an intro stats book." And I said, "Okay." how's that going to work? She said, well, I've got another co-author in mind. You don't know him, but you guys are going to be great together. His name is Paul Velleman. And she told Paul, who had a software product that was really great to teach intro stats, he said, you're going to work with Dick DeVoe. Just put us together. And the two of us met. And that was 25 years ago. And we sold 1 million books. So something
Oh my God. You sold 1 million of intro stats because I'm looking at it right now.
of all of them, intro stats, stats data and models, stats modeling the world, and business statistics. Yeah, we
Oh
sold
my
50 copies.
God. And
They're,
by the
they're
way,
all
guys, these are not cheap books. I'm
right,
looking at the hardcover, $116. This has gone on to schools all over the world, right?
right. And imagine how much revenue we've made for Pearson at that.
Oh,
Multi-million by
that guy
now.
is kicking himself for ever bashing you in the beginning. Am I right?
Yeah. He did. He actually came later at a conference and he congratulated me and he said, there aren't many people who are that successful in this market and you did a great job and he congratulated me. But yeah. But
So
anyway,
did the book put you on the map? And it's sort of my message to my clients is that once you write a book, you have this internal clarity. The market identifies you, so there's actually market clarity. But it gives you this prestige that pretty much opens many doors for you. So did this put you on the map?
well, it's interesting because they're really two different worlds. The consulting world in statistics and the textbook world probably helped a little, but the consulting was kind of a whole nother thing. I talked about my mentor, Stu Hunter, and young people always say to me, how do you get into consulting? What should I do first? And I said, I was really lucky. Two things happened. One is you mentioned Hewlett Packard. When I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and when I was finishing up my PhD, I interviewed at Hewlett Packard, and I was also teaching part-time at the Wharton School. And so I interviewed at Hewlett Packard, and they offered me a job, and the Wharton School offered me an instructorship. And I was like, okay, which do I do? And I said, you know what? The Hewlett Packard job looked great. It was at HP Labs out in Palo Alto, but I said, I really think I need to teach. That's what I do. That's my soul. I love teaching. So I went to Wharton, but the person from HP said, we have a plant out near Philadelphia that doesn't have a statistician, and they could really use your help. Would you mind going out there 1 day a week and just talking to people? How great is this? So I was
One day
the
a week? Hell yeah. Count me
1 day a
in.
week. Yeah. I was the resident statistician for that. I learned so much. I mean, just out in the trenches, have people with real problems coming up to me all the time. And so that started me off. And then I got hired at Princeton, and my mentor, Stu Hunter, was thrilled that I was uh, on the faculty, but he had retired because he was doing too much consulting. And he came to me one day with his planning book, like one of those Filofax books, and he had the week open, and it said Alcoa, 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 5 days, and then on top of it, it said Ford, 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 and he said, "I can't be at both. Which do you want?" So I said, well, "I'll go to Alcoa," and that was great. And that's how I got started. And then it's word of mouth, and it's just dependent on the industry, and it's been a great ride. I love consulting with real problems because not only is it fun and remunerative, but I also bring those problems back into the classroom, and students really appreciate that I've got real stories to tell.
Man, Alcoa, I think, is that a Pennsylvania-based company? I
Yeah,
thought
it's
it
in
was.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
It's in
yeah.
Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Yep. So I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I remember, I don't know, is it still around to this day? Right?
Oh yeah, it's out near Monroeville.
Yeah. Okay. For some reason, I thought it was sold, but okay, makes sense
No,
because
I
I've
go ahead.
that's a great bank.
I mean, Pittsburgh's gone through a lot of changes, lots of things going on. My father was the CEO of Harvest and Walker Refractories, which was downtown. And I don't know what their story is now, but anyway, Pittsburgh's gone through a lot. But
Oh, no doubt. And
yeah.
so just by being in these rooms, I mean, I'm just drawn to stats in general because I was just right before this call, I was on a call with my team and we were talking about the percentage of people with green eyes, it's 2%. And then there's a girl on my team who has green eyes and red hair. And it's like, wow, we looked that up. We're like, oh, it's only 0.14%. I just love stats in general like that kind of highlight certain trends that you could maybe capitalize on in the business space, or even just to see how rare something is. I love it. So curiosity is an absolute superpower. It's the way I look at it. I'm assuming you're a very curious person, but the way I look at it too, whenever I know my numbers and I'm able to break things down, it gives me such a clear picture of my business. It helps me make very well-informed decisions. So the more I know my stats, the better off I am as a business leader. And I'm assuming that's pretty much what you convey to people on a consistent basis in these rooms. Is that right?
Well, I couldn't have put it better. That's exactly it. You're making informed decisions and you're using the data and you're letting the data speak, and you're also using your expertise. So it's that wonderful combination that makes a great business decision, because you're not going to just go with the latest survey and blind. You're going to use your sense. I mean, I had a CTO at First USA Bank, which no longer exists. They got bought up. They went anyway. So he said to me once, he said, Dick, I've got a great idea here, but I want to do a survey first just to test it out. And he said, I want to know the sample size, how many I should do. And I said, well, let me ask you a question first. I said, so if the survey comes back and it says that your idea is great, what are you going to do? He said, oh, I've got the mailroom ready. We're going to roll this out. We're going to do it nationwide. I'm going to send out 2 million of these, next Tuesday. I said, that's great. I said, what if it comes back and it says your idea isn't going to work at all? He says, he says, what do you mean? It's a great idea. He said, it's a great idea. I'll probably roll it out anyway. And I said, you've just answered your sample size question. Just don't do it. So if you're not going to use the data, don't collect it.
Damn right. God, is that good? I was in that latter category, right? I didn't care what the data said. I was going to do it based off a gut instinct. That comes back to bite you eventually.
Well, that's your choice as a decision maker to do it, but you've got to have the responsibility then to say, I ignored the data or I didn't collect the data and I went with my gut feeling. And if it works out, you're a hero. And if it doesn't, then you've got some explaining to do. So,
yeah,
so
I would assume that Henry Ford, I think he has a great quote out there. If I would have surveyed enough people in 1910, what would they want? And they all would have said, I want faster horses, right? So there are certain
exactly.
people that are trendsetters that they really don't have to listen to the data because they know what the people want. But for the average business right now, you can collect data at such a high rate that
That's right.
with AI and technology, there's no reason not to do it. And I think that's the benefit of living now than, 100 years ago. We can see so much more with ease. And I'm assuming the bigger the company, the more data, and that's why they require someone like you. But there is probably a simplistic approach that you can apply to any entrepreneur. It doesn't matter how big or small, you can start collecting data, and therefore you can start to get that picture, whether it's today, next week, or next month, but just start to form the picture.
And I think you hit the nail on the head with what that kind of data can really do for you is to optimize and to figure out incrementally how you're going to improve your business. It's not going to give you that jump to the next product. That's what, there's a famous, you mentioned Ford, but the same thing happened with early photographs in the 70s and 80s with cameras. If you'd ask people what they want, they would have said, oh, I want this feature and that feature. And what I think it was Canon did is they looked at people's negatives and saw how many of them were out of focus and said, no, what you really need is automatic focusing. But nobody said that. Right. So they went to a different data set. They didn't ask people, they went to the actual evidence and decided from that. And the rest of that was history. That was brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like the average person probably said, man, I want a CD that holds 10,000 songs on it. Give me a CD, right? That's what everybody's thinking because they can't even picture an iPod, right? So Steve Jobs, if he would have surveyed people, doesn't make any sense.
I'm so glad you mentioned Steve because he is one of my favorite clients. I knew
Oh, you
Steve.
worked with him? You worked
I
with him
worked with
directly?
Steve. I worked with Steve when he was at Next, and Steve's great. Guess, I mean, he was a character and a half. And I remember talking to him about he was trying to build these. This is when he got fired from Apple, and he was out at the company Next, which was out in Mountain View. I think it was in Mountain View. Maybe it was, yeah. Anyway, somewhere around the Bay. was definitely in the West Bay because he was trying to make these things out in Fremont. And I heard from his right-hand man, a friend of mine, that he was having problems out there, that they were just having production problems. And so he said, you need to talk to Steve. So I was at Princeton. I got a call from Steve, and I had met him before, but I said, Steve, I hear you, it's great to talk to you. I said, I hear you've got some problems out in Fremont. There's silence on the phone. And I thought, okay. And after about a minute, he says, I do think we have some opportunities for improvement out in the East Bay. So,
Slowly,
so
clearly, but he would never say, I got problems. That's crazy.
exactly. That's I learned that. Okay, problems is out of my vocabulary for consulting. You don't have problems, but there's always opportunities. So, okay, so we talked about those opportunities. And he's just great because that's exactly right. I mean, he used the data for things like that were incremental, but when you're talking about coming up with a new product, nobody imagined the next Apple product. That's the mystery.
Mhm.
And how did he come up with that? Well, he may have used ideas from around, especially at HP Labs and Xerox Labs, as it turns out, but he put them into use. He was a genius that way. So
Wow. And I think that next, I mean, I know that Steve Jobs was a master chess player, I think, because I've heard, and maybe I can't verify it completely, but he built Next in a way that it wasn't really ever going to take off, but he was putting everything in place and I think it led to the development of the Pixar. I think there was some type of connection there. And
wouldn't be
it
surprised.
formed a lot of things that he would use later on whenever he took back Apple. So even though Next was a failure in the eyes of
Yeah.
the public, it was still a major success. So I look at all these things that these great wizards have done, and everything's a chess move, and they're growing and developing. And even though it didn't take off, he obtained some type of tool and resource that he was able to apply down the road, which made him a real success.
Well, and you've hit another thing is that you don't learn by just applying what you know to the simple problems. You learn by screwing up. I mean, that's how you make progress. You have to make mistakes. Yeah, I've made really dumb mistakes, and then you don't do that again. But if you don't do that, what do what if you don't? You have to take some risks along the way. So.
So, can you just give us a little behind the scenes of what it was like dealing with him? Like, what were you tracking? Were you able to kind of maybe break down some production problems or opportunities? Remember, we were not using the word problems, but opportunities. What did that even look like?
So when you go out there, so what I describe to people when I do consulting is I am a business therapist. Now, why do I say that? Because a therapist doesn't solve your problems. A therapist talks to you and has you solve your problems, right? That's what a good therapist is doing. They're not saying, okay, I hear you. Here's what you need to do. Take 2 of these and call me in the morning and, do 10 Om Mani Padme Hums and come back next week. No, they listen to you. And so when I go into a business opportunity, there's clearly some reason they've called me in. And what I do is start listening to that. And what I do is just repeat back to me. I don't know anything. I'm a statistician. I mean, I got a call once and they said, we're having some issues making ingots out this was back out in Alcoa. They said, I said, well, okay. First question, what's an ingot?
I guess the widget doesn't matter for you. You make pictures out of numbers. That's it.
Yeah, I need to know enough about it because here's what I'll tell you why it's important. I need to know as much about it, but at the beginning I don't know, and I'm listening, and when I typically go in there and I say, okay, so you've got a problem with English, so and then they talk for a while, and I said, well, it sounds to me like, and then I just repeat back to me what they say, and the guy says, yeah, that's exactly it. And I go, okay. And then we start by getting a little more technical. And we might say, have you tried this? Have you tried identifying what do you think's causing it? What do you think is causing the problem? What are the possible things that might have changed? And we go through that. And then Then we'll go into experimental design to try to take all those possible factors and put them into groups to try to test which ones might be doing it. And that can be a really involved um, process. In fact, this one about the ingots, they said, well, here's the good news. We have lots of data. And I said, okay, great. Can you send it to me? And they said, sure. Where should we send it? I said, well, here's what we got. I said, how long is it going to take to get it to me? And they said, oh, a couple of weeks. When I hear a couple of weeks, it turns out what they mean is 5 months. And when they got it 5 months later, it's not really ready. And I had to have some more conversations, really 8 months later that we get the data into form because there's a lot of data and it needs to be clean. How do you clean data? You need to know stuff to clean the data. It takes a team. So this is a constant conversation with people. I mean, I can't do it all. I don't have a staff and they're not going to pay me my hourly rate to clean data. So it's got to be working with them. So I'm really asking questions, informing them, getting the process, and eventually we're getting there.
Oh, man. Yeah. So when you say it's going to take 5 months to put together, I can't even imagine how long it takes to actually go through it and try to make sense of it all. So nowadays with technology, is there certain programs that these big companies are using? I
Oh,
have a
yeah.
CRM that I use that pretty much changed my life, but I'm still using Excel. And once we have enough of an understanding of what we're trying to track, we'll probably upgrade to different software. But Excel is able to give us the clearest picture for us to make an informed decision from week to week. So it's those two programs combined. I'm assuming these big companies are not using these general programs like we are, but is there any commonality of what they are using?
Oh, there are lots of products out there, and I don't want to go through the litany of all of them. I work a lot with SAS, which has great data management and lots of analytical tools, but there are lots of other companies out there that are doing that, and it really depends on their companies that specialize in graphical methods. There's things like Tableau and other things that other software that can handle depending on the size of your data set. Right. And some of these we're talking about massive amounts of data. And I had a friend who worked at Amazon in the early days. And so we thought, wow, he's dealing with all this data, which now seems really small, but at the time it seemed like crazy. And we said, so what are you doing? What kind of sophisticated things are you doing? Are you using neural nets? Are you using deep learning? Are you doing this? And he said, well, to be honest, in the last year, I've used means and standard deviations, and I think maybe group means. I mean, a lot of it is really basic. It's
Yeah.
looking at just looking at your data, right? I mean, it's the 80-20 rule. Looking at your data and understanding what it's saying and deciding if it's germane at all to the problem you're trying to solve. That's most of it. And that's the part that's not going to get replaced by AI. I
Mm.
mean, the guts of it, sure. The analytical part, we can ask ChatGPT to go find this and that, but to figure out what data you need and to make sense out of it, that's a combination of statistical expertise and business acumen. And it's that kind of teamwork.
Well,
And the
I
people that have
was
to get the data, I don't go into the databases and write the code that gets the data out. I need the IT group because that's not my thing. So it's a great teamwork.
Man, I was just watching an interview with Elon Musk, and he had a conversation with his head manager, I think, of one of his cars, whether it was the Roadster or something else. And he just asked the individual a simple question. This is the guy that's in charge of the car. How
Right?
much does this car cost to make, right? You would think that you would know this number. He had no idea. And it's because of everything else he's keeping track of. So that's probably why they need a business therapist like you to ask the good questions to make sure you maybe have an outside view of keeping everything on track and finding out what really matters.
Yeah,
So, wait, go ahead.
I asked the dumb questions. I asked the
The
questions.
simple
And
questions almost,
and
right?
sometimes that's just it. I mean, that's it. I want to go back. You asked me way in the beginning, like we got jumped ahead, but I wanted to get from how we got to intrastats. So finally, when I started looking at intrastats, I've been teaching intrastats for years, and I looked at the book that I was teaching from, which I had never read. By the way, most professors don't read the introductory statistics books that they're using because why would they? They know this stuff. So they don't read it. I read it and I said, oh my God, I made my students buy this book. I mean, I used it for the exercises and for the table of contents, but I ignored it from that. And I said, oh, I have to write a book that talks to students. So we looked at the big seller in our field, and I'm imagining this 18-year-old. So why do our books sell 1 million? Because I looked at this and it said chapter 10. He said, in this chapter, we will examine how we estimate the parameters for the hypothesis test of the binomial distribution. I just saw this 18-year-old go, oh my God. And so instead we said, we started the same chapter with, who do you think wears seatbelts more often, men or women?
That's
And
the I have an assumption, but yeah, what a great question to ask right out of the gate, huh?
then so we said, how would we find this out? Well, first we need to find this data. And it turns out there is data. There are data about this that highway commissions have collected. Okay, now we have the data. Well, how would we test whether the difference that we see is really there or whether it's just the sample? And then we can get on to the stuff by motivating the question. And that's what made our books different. Two things. We talked informally to the students and we motivated everything with real life examples instead of burying them in the exercises.
Oh,
So
that's awesome.
and that's what I try to do in consulting. I try to break it down. Hewlett Packard used to call me. They said, "Oh yeah, DeVoe, yeah, he's the statistician that actually talks to people." And I think that's the trick, right? I mean, when I go in, the chances that they're going to use the really technical stuff that I know is very, very small. Mostly it's going to be helping them figure out what the main factors are in the problem that they've got and just helping them talk through it. That's why I say it's therapy. And then if I get to use some real statistical expertise, that's just gravy on top of it. But
So having the real world examples, right? Stuff that may spark their curiosity with like the seatbelt thing, right? They're going to get into a car. They may think of that. That probably draws on their curiosity, makes them a little bit more fascinated with the research. And therefore, it's almost like if you're able to entertain the students, you're able to teach them, right? It's the only
that's
way
it.
individuals learn.
That's it. You've got it. You've got entertainment, and people can call it infotainment. Fine, I don't mind that because you're right. I mean, I'm not gonna get the very many students excited about just the technical details. There are a few, and they will become statisticians themselves. That's great. That's not who I'm training for the most part. They'll train themselves. I'm trying to get the person who's got to go out in the real world and solve problems. So that's who I'm addressing.
Yeah. The more I jumped into the entrepreneurial space, the more curious I became because everything I learned increased my value, which made me a better entrepreneur, better leader, and I
Yeah,
was rewarded financially. So my curiosity spiked, and therefore I'm able to dissect the Pareto principle and see how it applies to pretty much everything, right? The 80-20 rule is everywhere if you look close enough.
it's
Um,
everywhere. Yeah.
so is the average person, like I said, is an entrepreneur out there. Is there anything that you can convey to somebody who has a startup or maybe has, maybe a 10 to $20 million business that you could maybe share with them that some of the big companies are doing or what you recommend?
Well, I think you hit it already, is that start collecting data that think about the things you don't know and how you would go about finding those things out. And if you can have the ability to collect it and it's not incredibly expensive, or perhaps you can buy it, but you might be able to collect it yourself and then have at it. I mean, like we said, the most of the techniques we're talking about are not that difficult. It's just getting the data and listening to it. And so yeah, the very tactical things, they'll come along at some point, but you don't need that for the
Yeah.
most part, especially most startups. You have to figure out whether you need data or, there have been some great entrepreneurs that just have gone by the seat of their pants with a great idea and go for it. I mean, don't slow yourself down if you're not going to use the data.
Yeah, I would assume that companies like Amazon are playing a completely different game than the average startup, right? A startup should know the stats when it comes to how much money does it take to get a lead, and how long does it take to turn that lead into a customer, and how many touch points? If you know those basic aspects, you probably can become way more successful. And the way I look at it, if you just start collecting data now, you don't even have to look at it every day. But as time goes on, you'll have so much data that time will be an asset to you. You've used so much time to gather all this that it's the historical picture that you can now see how you can make adjustments and then track those adjustments. So if you just start tracking it as fast as possible, even if you don't have a time right now to analyze it, by putting it down in place a month from now, you will be more valuable as a company, right?
Right. And be careful too, though, that depends on how quick your environment is changing. So if you're trying to base decisions on something that the data that you collected a year ago, realize
Oh,
that
that's true.
things may have really changed since then. So, that's another issue.
Oh,
Um,
right. With algorithms, right? Even just the fact that meta ads change from year to year, you might not get leads for $1 like you did back in the day. And now it's completely a different landscape.
and it so depends on the context. If you're talking about the probability of a lead coming through or the probability that somebody's going to click through on your website and you're trying to get that information, if you can get ancillary information that's going to help you increase that probability a bit, that might be worth it. But you've got to look at the ROI on that and look at how much it's costing you to get that information, how much it's costing you to analyze it, and how much it really will help you. So all of that's in the calculations. And for a startup, it may not be time yet. Those are very incremental. You're probably more worried about how to get the next round of funding
Yeah.
and how to keep going to pay your employees so you can get to the next level. So that's a whole other question.
Yeah, and the more simple it is in the beginning, the more you're going to use the data, and capturing data that you're not going to use, what a waste. So if you don't have the clear picture, what's funny is that the more I know my numbers, the more I can hold a conversation with other business leaders and they take me more seriously. So that's one aspect, but the more you know your numbers, the more you can guide your team, and I think your team respects you because you understand what's happening. And in the beginning, it's very difficult as a startup, but when you break 10 million or even a million, you might have more of an understanding and maybe a little bit more leeway and time to analyze these numbers. So it's
And
good.
a lot of data you have to collect anyway. So it's sitting there. And that's what happened at First USA. Back in the 80s, this guy was brilliant. He realized he was sitting on a gold mine. They were collecting data and collecting data. And he said, he brought me in. He said, Dick, I want to do a couple of things with the data that we've been collecting because they were exponentially growing and it was very exciting. This is 1986, 1987. And he said, well, one thing I want to do is I want to market to different segments in our customer base. He said, so I want to separate people into different categories for advertising pending. I said, oh yeah, this is a standard problem. I know how to do this. And we talked about that. He said, but there's something else I want to do. He said, what I want to do is look at their past purchases and I want to recommend stuff to them that they might not have thought about to see for their next purchase. And I said, wow, I don't know how to do that. That is a really cool idea. This is 1986.
Does this sound familiar, guys? I mean,
Yeah. And I said, well, where are the data? I said, are they in that room with all the IBM computers? And he said, I wish we were there yet. He said, no, they're still out in the data warehouse. I said, data warehouse? What do you mean? And he points to this brick building about 3 blocks from where we were. He said, the data are sitting in boxes out there. And literally, you remember that printer paper that was about this wide with
yes, with the
can you
lines.
imagine? Can you imagine going through and looking at people's past purchases? I said to him, look, this is a great idea. When you get the digital data warehouse built and it's all digitized, call me back and we'll have a field day.
Oh, man.
But what a great idea. I mean, he had the idea. He just didn't have the data in the right place yet.
Good Lord. And Jeff Bezos mastered that in 94, 95. He put it in place, right?
Exactly. And there were people that were doing it before that. My friend Lyle Unger, my colleague, was doing it for CD Now. CD Now, you probably don't remember. They were an early
I
CD
remember hearing
start.
that name. I swear to God, I remember hearing that name. So they did that too?
Yeah, they were before Amazon, and you would buy a CD and they would recommend, you said, oh, you like the Dixie Chicks, you'll like blah, blah, and blah, blah. And Lyle wrote the algorithm for them. And it's basically K Nearest Neighbors, which was used in the Netflix prize, and it's the basis of all these things. But on top of it is lots of layers and lots of business knowledge and teamwork. And it's not just that simple, but that's the simple idea. You look at what people like you have done and you use that. Right.
Outside of Steve Jobs, is there anybody you look up to or you've been in the room with, maybe you're inspired by or you consulted with that really impresses you?
There have been, and I can tell you a very funny story about the weirdest consulting
Yeah,
that I ever.
please.
Okay. So, for my doctoral thesis, I analyzed the data of a woman who was getting her PhD in physics, music, psychology, and philosophy. And what she was doing with that was she was taking trained musicians and trying to decide if when you play a musical note, there are harmonics above it, right? So what she was playing with those harmonics and stretching them, and she wanted to know whether they could figure out what an octave was, even if she messed with the harmonics. And she found out that some musicians did better than others. Drummers, not so much, but my violinists were better at this. And she had this data that was separated into two regimes. So that's what I did. But anyway, that's really not important. The important thing is she had a day job, which was she was the acoustic engineer for the Grateful Dead.
Wow.
So so
That's
anyway,
awesome.
so that was fun. And so the Dead were on tour, and I was at the Wharton School in Philadelphia, and I got a call from Betsy, and Mickey Hart was writing his book Planet Drum. And he asked Betsy one day, he said, Betsy, how many drummers do you think there are in the world? She said, I don't know. She said, but we're going to Philadelphia. And my friend Dick DeVoe, oh, he knows this kind of stuff. He's got a computer and everything. He will go talk to him.
A
So I get a
computer, a
call.
computer back then was a big deal. Is that what you're saying? What
Yeah,
year was this?
exactly. Right. So I
Wow.
call and Betsy says, can you come over to the Warwick Hotel and talk to Mickey about how many drummers there are? So we had a great time. We're talking about all these things he could do. None of it was very practical. I'll admit. I mean, first of all, I asked him the questions. What's a drummer? Like,
How do you
really?
define that? Yeah,
How
right.
do you define what it you mean professional drummer? I said, well, if you want to talk about professional drummers in the US, you could look at drumhead sales. That might be a ticket, divide. This is the old how many piano tuners are there in Chicago question. You figure out different parameters and you put it together. You could probably come up with how many professional drummers there were active in the US pretty easily. Now, if you're talking about drumming worldwide, it's a whole different question. And so anyway, we talked about this stuff. And anyway, Mickey's in the middle of it. He says, we got this gig over at the convention center. Why don't you pop into the limo with us and we'll go talk backstage before the concert? I said, sure. I said, I got to go see my girlfriend in New York, but what the heck, I'll do that. So I get into the limo. I think Jerry, who was in the limo ahead of us, was me, Bob Weir, and Mickey in the limo going to the Dead concert.
Oh,
Now you can imagine, we drive up behind the convention center, and there are all these policemen, and as much tie-dye as you can imagine seeing in one lifetime is all there, right? And they're all pointing to this car going, and who the hell am I? So I get out between the two of them, and we get police escorted across the stage. And the best thing is, the convention center is right across the street from University of Pennsylvania. So I'm giving my parade wave to whoever's out there, and all of a sudden I hear this voice from about the 10th row go, Professor DeVoe?
your student just saw you hanging with the dead.
Going backstage to hang with the dead. The next day he says, I mean, he was in awe, right? I mean, he says, did I see you on the stage last night? I said, yeah. He said, what were you doing? I said, statistical consulting.
Coolest job.
He said, you're like the official statistician for the Grateful Dead. And that just stuck. So I've been known as the official statistician of the Grateful Dead ever since.
Oh,
That was the craziest consulting that I've ever had to do. But
that is awesome. And I think Jerry died in 93. I think Pittsburgh was actually one of his last concerts from what I remember. I'm not sure, but what year was that?
That was, let's see, probably 83, 84.
Wow. Oh my God, that's so awesome.
And the
That
cool
is
thing was, I hadn't been in the convention center since I was a kid in 1964, September of 64, when I saw the Beatles in that very auditorium. So,
in what city was that?
Philadelphia,
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Oh,
that for me, it was just the whole thing was crazy. And I left at during the intermission I don't know if they call it halftime, but anyway, at the intermission and went up to New York to see my girlfriend, now my wife. So,
well, no wonder she wanted to marry you. She's like, this guy's hanging out with the dead. This guy's somebody. He's gonna be somebody. I like this.
uh,
Wow, that's great, man. You don't realize how cool of a life a it can lead to, right? Like that is a really cool adventure, man. So hanging with Steve Jobs, the Grateful Dead. I mean, can you be any more different in those worlds?
it
Phenomenal.
was John Tukey, my mentor, who said the cool thing about being a statistician is we get to play in everybody else's backyard. And that is really it.
That is awesome, dude. Yeah, you got a wild life, man. And you're a cyclist and you do the swimming. So yeah, we just did a book with a guy who swims miles and miles at a time. So I can't imagine the shape that you have to be in for what you do. And I guess you're a triathlon guy, is that right?
Well, I haven't done a triathlon in ages, but I do long distance cycling. I love it. I've been across France 3 times, and it's great. Nice,
Man.
great hobby.
Last question I have for you is outside of your own books, is there one that you recommend our listeners or viewers pick up? Is there a defining moment in your life whenever you read something? Like I've read Rich Dad Poor Dad, it changed my life. Anything like that for you?
Wow, in this field, what would I read? I mean, I have to say, I love anything by Malcolm Gladwell.
Of course. Nice.
He's great, and the Freakonomics book is fun. There's lots of it's the two of them together. What I like about them is that they look at data in interesting ways and make a story out of it. And that's really what I've done in my career, is trying to make stories out of data. So both of those are great examples of that.
Yeah. So basically, you're a storyteller. I'm glad
Yeah,
you
that's
said
I'm a
that.
professional storyteller. That is what I do.
Oh, that's great, man. I didn't know I'd have this much fun talking with you. I know you are a wealth of knowledge, but it is absolutely great to talk with somebody who's had the adventures and stories that you do. So, guys, check out his books. They're easy to find on Amazon. Many of them intro stats and business stats, and a few other ones that you're a part of. So, is there a website or a social media channel that you recommend for people to look up? I know you're easy to find, but anything?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have a great Google name, Deveaux. There's not that you'll find my brother who has a jazz book. You'll find me, and you'll find some people that have some literary criticism books. But I'm easy to find there. Pearson has a website of our books. If you put in DeVoe, Velleman, and Bock, Bock, those are my co-authors, and you'll find it there. And um, until my airport book comes out, that's really the place to go. I mean, eventually I want to write a book with these stories in it and have it be in every airport around the world. But until then, that's where I'd go.
Yeah, I'm looking at all your books, by the way. There's one that says intro stats with you on a bicycle, I guess, but you don't have any books about these adventures, and I think you need
Not
to put
yet.
those down on a piece
Not
of
yet.
paper.
I have to tell you the last thing about introstats is, we called it introstats. And my editor, when she said, what do you want to call this book? Because every other book in the field had been introductory statistics, the blah, 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 blah. And I said, no, no, no. We want to call it introstats. She said, no, you can't do that. I said, what do you mean? That's what the students call it. They don't say
Yeah.
I'm taking introductory statistics, the data analytic approach. No, they say I'm taking introstats. So let's call it that. And she finally said, okay, let's give it a try. And some people wouldn't adopt the book. We got some people early on who said, I can't adopt a book that demeans our profession in this way. And I thought, okay, you know what? I can't make everybody happy. And if that's you won't like my book anyway, if that's the way you think. So the heck with you. But
Man, they're not marketers. They don't
so maybe that's the
realize.
other lesson is go with what you believe. Be yourself. I write like I talk. I give the titles that I believe in, and you got to believe in it and just keep going and don't give up.
Well, think about it from the perspective of the audience. Do you really believe Steve Jobs would take you seriously if you weren't yourself? Or you believe, I believe that you said the name Betsy. Would you think she would trust you if you weren't yourself? Of course not. So be authentic, be yourself, and that's how you resonate. So, guys, Dick DeVoe, easy to find on Google and incredible wealth of knowledge. So thanks again for being here, man. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Been a lot of fun.
Remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to $1 million life. Right on.